Good evening, all. Tonight I wanted to talk about one of my favorite Terry Gilliam films. There are a lot of favorite Terry Gilliam films on my list. I like almost everything that he has ever produced. But one in particular I wanted to talk about, I think it's kind of underrated, and I think it's gotten something of a bad rap over the years. I think it's really quite a brilliant film, and that's The Fisher King from 1991. It stars Robin Williams as a character known as Parry, who is a homeless man. Jeff Bridges as Jack Lucas, who's kind of a shock jock, sort of like Howard Stern radio personality. Amanda Plummer as a woman named Lydia, who is Parry's love interest. Mercedes Ruehl as Anne, who is Jack's on-again, off-again girlfriend. David Hyde Pierce as Lou Rosen, who is Jack's agent. Michael Jeter has a very funny character called Gloria, who is a gay transvestite stripogram singer, basically. Homeless also, which is kind of a very interesting, well-portrayed character. Chris Howell is the Red Knight, who's a very menacing, sort of medieval, nightmarish character. He's also this film's stunt coordinator, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if they just hired him to do that. You never see his face anyway. He's always in a mask. Helmet, actually. Lara Harris is Sandra, who is Jack's girlfriend at the beginning of the movie. And Mel Bourne plays a character called Langdon Carmichael, who is important in a way and not in another way. And I'll tell you about that later. I am going to do major spoilers here. For once, I'm actually going to do the entire plot of the movie. If you haven't seen it, then don't watch the rest of this. But it doesn't make sense unless you know the whole thing, so I really have to do it. I can't really leave anything out and have you understand the movie and what it's really about. And one more pivotal character, Christian Clemenson plays a guy named Edwin. His name is Edwin Malnick, who is a radio listener who does something very terrible. That kind of starts the whole thing. The plot is about, as I said, Jack Lucas, this character played by Jeff Bridges, is a kind of an asshole. He's a wise guy, shock jock, radio DJ, and he does a morning show kind of like Don Imus, and who was also an asshole. And he's always like insulting people. And this guy, he has this kind of continuous caller called Edwin, who kind of calls him in every day and kind of subsists on his advice, etc. And he's talking about he met this girl in a yuppie bar, and he's saying, yuppies are scum, and she's never going to go for you, and they only breed with their own kind. They're against ordinary people and everything that makes America great, and they have to be stopped before it's too late. And they're a disease, they're evil. And he says, okay, to this Edwin guy, and he says, okay, just very quietly, and he hangs up. Jack is trying to get a deal for a video show of some sort, I think it's called On the Radio, and his agent Lou is trying to get him this deal, and he thinks it's going to work out, and he's talking to his girlfriend Sandra about it, and he's very casual and thinks everything's great. And then he turns on the news in the morning, the next morning, and finds out that this guy that he advised about the yuppies actually went into a yuppie bar called Babbitt's with a shotgun and murdered 7 people and then blew his head off. And it's a big tragedy, and obviously Jack is being blamed for inciting it. They play the clip that he had on the radio, and he obviously loses his job. And fast forwards to 3 years later. He's now kind of a drunk. He's living with Mercedes Ruehl, who owns a video shop. That kind of dates the film for you, videos. But all he does is basically go out and drink, and he's not working, he's not doing anything, he's not really doing it. He's supposed to help work in the store, and he like alienates people. A woman's asking for a romance film or something, he gives her a porno film, and they said, okay, go back upstairs and stop being a jerk. And then he goes on like a real bender, gets completely blotto, ends up in like a really bad section of town under the Brooklyn Bridge, and he's mistaken because he tore his raincoat on the way out of the building, and he's mistaken for a bum by two kind of punk kids who are gonna light him on fire. And he was planning on committing suicide anyway. He's got these cement blocks strapped to his feet, and he's going to jump in the river. And these kids assault him. They start hitting him. They're going to light him on. They pour gasoline on him, and then out of the blue, he is saved by Robin Williams' character Perry, who just jumps into the scene, shoots an arrow actually into one of these kids' leg, and hits the other one with a ball and wrapped up in a sack. And he's got a whole bunch of other people, other homeless people who are his fellow. He claims he's a knight. He's got a sword that's actually a hood ornament from a Ford F-150, and he's carrying it around like it's a sword. He's got a trash can lid that's his shield, and he's got all these weapons, and they chase off the kids, and he captures one of them and ties them up, and they're going to beat him up, and the other one gets away, and so he's saved Jack, and Jack passes out basically, or they give him a drink and they take him back to where these other homeless people have like an encampment, and he says, I need a drink. They give him a drink of something really strong, and he just he faints. And in the morning he wakes up and he's in this boiler room where Perry lives, and it's filled with all these weird things, and he welcomes him back. He tells him, you want something to eat, and you want a fruit pie, and he goes, no, I don't want that, I'm gonna throw up, or something like that. Oh, I'm sorry, it's off. And Perry tells Jack, the little people told me you're the one. And he says, what do you mean, I'm the one what? And he starts going on about how he thinks that the Holy Grail is in this mansion owned by this guy named Langdon Carmichael, who lives up on 55th and 5th, apparently, in this castle-like building. And he's a billionaire. And there's a picture of his library, and in the library is a silver cup. And Perry believes that this is the Holy Grail, and he's on a quest, being sent on a quest by these little people to recover the Grail, but he can't do it himself, he says, and he needs somebody else to do it. And you find out why later, but he's got all these strange drawings in his boiler room of what looks like a knight, but his face is kind of slashed over with red paint, and very kind of freaky looking. You don't really know what that is. Jack decides he's going to leave, and he says, thanks a lot, I appreciate you letting me stay here. And he passes the landlord who, Perry says something like that. He says, I'm the janitor of God. That was funny. And anyway, he's told him about this quest. And the reason that he goes out and he talks to this landlord. The landlord who lets him stay in the boiler room tells him, his name's not really Perry, his name is really Henry Sagan. He was a professor of medieval history at Hunter College, and something terrible happened to him when he was in this wine bar called Babbitt's with his wife, and this crazy guy came in and blew her head off with a shotgun right in front of him. And, she was very beautiful, and he was sent to a mental institution for a year, and he had a complete nervous collapse, and that's when he lost his job and he became homeless. So that's why he lets him stay there. He has sympathy for him, and he has a few pictures of him. One of the things he shows Jack is that he was writing it was either a script or a treatise called The Fisher King, and that relates to this something that happens a little bit later. But Jack now realizes that he's somewhat responsible for what happened to Perry, because of course he's the guy who egged on the radio listener who shot the people in Babbitt's, and that was one of those people was Perry's wife, who was killed. He killed 7 people, and then he killed himself. So he now feels guilty, and he goes back and meets with Perry, and Perry takes him up onto the street and says, you got to come with me, you got to come with me. He says, what? He says, just come with me. And he's waiting outside an office building somewhere in downtown Manhattan. And as he's waiting, this rather mousy woman comes out. She's coming out of the elevator, and she gets pushed back in by somebody, and then eventually she comes back out. And then, Robin Williams is following her. She goes to a book stand and picks out a paperback because she's knocking all the books off the shelves. It's like a comedy routine. She's knocking all the books off the shelves. And he's like trying to she follows her to a restaurant where she goes into a diner, and she's trying to eat dumplings with chopsticks, but she's not holding them right, so the chopsticks, the dumpling keeps flying off, and I guess she doesn't want to ask for a fork, but she can't manage to eat the dumpling. And that's like something out of a Laurel and Hardy routine where, the scene where he's trying to get the pea, and he's chasing it around the fork, and it pops off and ends up in Ollie's soup or something. Very similar, kind of humor. That's one of the quote-unquote problems with this movie. It was written by a guy named Richard Lagravanesse, who wrote a lot of really good movies. But I don't think that either he or Gilliam could really decide what they wanted to write. Did they want to write a comedy? Did they want to write a romance? Did they want to write a fantasy? Did they want to write a tragedy? They weave all these elements in. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work. Overall, however, I think even though this film is kind of a hot mess, it works. And I'll tell you why it works. The principal reason, and you see a scene later where he's trying to, Jack gives Perry some money, and then he gives it to another homeless person. He says, "What did you do that for? I wanted you to have that money." He says, "But I don't want it. What would I do with it?" He says, I wanted this other person to have it." And then Jack starts talking about how he knows who he really is. He says, "I know you're not a homeless person. I know you were a professor." He says, "No, I don't want to hear this." And all of a sudden you see the Red Knight on this red horse, this red charger, who is, armed. He has a, armored comparison like some horses did. And he's carrying like a flaming lance. And he's chasing Perry. He's going, "No." And then for some reason, he determines that the Red Knight is afraid of Jack. He starts retreating, and he's chasing this Red Knight, all across Central Park West, and you chase him across Fifth Avenue. Almost gets hit by a car, and they're chasing him through Central Park, and finally they wind up on top of a stone. And he's just saying, "Isn't this beautiful?" He says, "Who were we chasing?" He says, "Didn't you see him?" He said, "No, I didn't see him. Who were we chasing?" He's like out of breath. He says, "The Red Knight." He says, "Who's the Red Knight?" He doesn't answer him, but he tells him, "Did you ever hear about the Fisher King?" And he says, "No." He says, "Well, the Fisher King was a young boy was told was wandering in the woods. A young prince was wandering in the woods, and he was told by God that he was meant to guard the Holy Grail, and he had a vision of the Holy Grail, and he didn't want this. He wanted power and glory and to become a king. And so when he reached into the Grail, into the fire where the Grail was in the middle of this fire, he couldn't touch the Grail, but the fire burned him and wounded him very badly. And throughout the years, the wound became greater and greater until he lost his love for life. He didn't have any purpose any longer, and felt like he just wanted to die. And he slowly started dying. And as he was laying dying in his palace, a fool came in, and the fool didn't know anything about his wound, and said, "What can I get for you, sire?" And he says, "I'm thirsty. Could you please get me some water?" And he brought him a cup of water, and as he drank it, he realized that his wound was starting to heal. He realized that the cup was the Grail. And he said, "How is it that you found what my greatest knights could never find?" He said, "I don't know. All I know is that you were thirsty, and I wanted to bring you some water." So that's sort of the way the Grail works. It could only be found by somebody pure, like the tale of Parsifal, who was the knight of King Arthur's Round Table who originally found the Grail. He could only find it because he was pure, i.e. he was a virgin. And he was the only one who found it. So that's the story of the Fisher King. Now, how that relates is important because Gilliam does a little bit of a trick here. He leads you to believe that in relation to the allegory, Perry is the Fisher King, in that any time he starts to think about his past, and specifically about his wife's murder, he starts to see the Red Knight, and he starts to kind of grow crazy. And so he's got this wound that can't be healed unless it's healed by the Grail. And eventually, there's another side story that I don't know why they wrote this in, but again, I think this is just because they wanted the comedy. He's constantly looking to find this girl, Lydia. He doesn't know her name even yet, but this girl, this red-haired girl who he has been tracking, and he waits for her at Grand Central Station because she always shows up at the same time. You see like kind of this fanciful waltz of people in the station are waltzing around him and around her, and that's in Perry's imagination. Of course, they're not really doing that. Jack also talks to a kind of a philosophical homeless guy who's talking about, why he wanted to stab his boss in the arm with a scissor one day, and he just decided, no, it's not worth stabbing you with a scissor, I'm just going to quit. And then he became homeless. Kind of an interesting thing. Basically said he did it for moral reasons. But again, a scene that wasn't really necessary, and I don't think it really added a lot. But anyway, he's pursuing this girl, and he can't figure out what to do. Jack tries calling her from the video store, and Mercedes Ruehl thinks he's calling another woman because he wants a date. He's trying to explain to her, no, it's not for me, it's not for me, it's for Perry. This is the girl that he likes, and he's afraid to ask her out. And I thought I would try something and tell her that she won a free membership, and then she'd have to come to the store, and we'll have Perry in the store, and he'll meet her, and maybe he'll talk to her. Well, things don't exactly work out the way they planned. They meet. When after he tells them about the Fisher King, they hear somebody in trouble, a woman apparently screaming, and they run into the 59th Street transfers, and there's a couple on horses that ride by, and they've apparently tried to ride down this homeless gay person, Gloria, who is Michael Jeter, and again does a really good job playing this character, and say, are you all right? So, oh yeah, I'm perfectly all right. I love being bloody and horse shit. That's a great line. And they take him to the hospital, and he's acting like really weird, and saying, I want to go to Venice. I want to be like Audrey Hepburn in 3 Coins in the Fountain. Why can't I be Audrey Hepburn? And it's just like a really kind of a hilarious, over-the-top performance. But they're going to use him in this plot to get Lydia, because they call her and tell her she's won this free membership. And she doesn't believe it. She thinks it's somebody in accounting pulling a gag. She works at a publishing company, pulling a gag on her. And so she hangs up. And instead, what they do is they send Michael Jeter in a kind of Frankenfurter-looking outfit, fishnet stockings and panties and a boa, and singing this song that tells her that she's won this contest, and it's really funny. Great scene, and now she has to, and gives her this whole bunch of balloons, and now she actually believes it. So she goes to the video store, and they put Robin Williams in a shirt from the video store. He says, what am I supposed to do? He says, just follow my lead and do what we say, help her find videos or whatever. And they bring her into the store, and like a hilarity ensues. This is where the real comedy part comes in, because she's saying she doesn't have a VCR. I say, oh, don't worry, we'll lend you one. And they just want to do anything to get her to stay in the store. So Robin Williams can kind of try and set up a date with her. Well, things are not going well. She doesn't like any of the videos they have, saying, I like musicals. And I said, well, we have a few musicals. She said, well, I've already seen all these. She said, well, we have a new one, and we ordered it. It's not in yet. It'll be in next week. So she said, well, I'll come back next week. And she notices Mercedes Ruehl has these fancy fingernails with little stars painted on them. She says, I like your nails. Who did them? She says, as a matter of fact, I did. She says, again, quick thinking, Jack says, she does other people's nails too. She says, could you do mine? She says, yeah. She says, well, how much? And before he can say something, because he's been like discounting everything, saying she gets 10 free videos and all this. And Mercedes Ruehl's obviously not happy. She says, $40. She says, $40? she's thinking, she's calculating, doing all this calculation. Okay, when can you do it? And Jack says, tonight. Tonight? Yeah, tonight. So she comes back later, and again, this is all to, get things set up with having her go on a date with Robin Williams, who's very nervous, and, he couldn't even barely talk to her at the store. And a funny scene where she's looking through the videos and knocking everything on the floor. Like, all the video boxes go flying, and Mercedes Ruehl's face is priceless, like, getting more and more frustrated, with this proceeding. And so eventually what happens is she goes to get her nails. She comes back to get her nails done, and she's both drinking and smoking pot with Mercedes Ruehl, and she's starting to laugh and like have a good time and relax. And she's telling she says, nobody wants to go out with me, and it's very hard to meet people, and I'm not interesting. She said, oh, you're being too tough on yourself. And he said, I'll tell you one thing. Said, what? You can be a real bitch. She says, really? She says, yeah. And she just starts laughing, and they're like rolling on the floor laughing. And Jack is trying to set Robin Williams up. He gives him one of his old suits, which is way too big for him. He's trying to make it fit by stapling the sleeves and stapling the pant legs, and it still looks ridiculous. This is white suit with like brown pinstripes, and looks like something a pimp from a bad 1970s blaxploitation film would wear. And anyway, they managed to set up this date to go out to Chinese food. And again, hilarity ensues because, they repeat the gag with the chopsticks almost too much, to a point where, you're saying, okay, I've already seen that gag. I don't really need to see it 20 times. But, they do other things with other types of food. Like there's this, the Chinese noodles, and she can't figure out how to get them off her plate. They're slopping all over the place. And Robin Williams chases a meatball across the table and ends up on her, and he goes, yes, goal! And, she's laughing. So they had a good time. And then there's kind of an interesting romantic scene in that they get, Robin Williams is walking her home, and he's asking her about what she does, and he's interested, and she goes through this thing. She says, oh, I know what's going to happen now. He says, what do you mean? She said, well, you're walking me home, and you're going to want to call up for a cup of coffee. He says, I don't drink coffee. She says, and then you're going to want to drink, and we'll have a drink and have a nightcap, and then you're kind of attracted to me, and things will happen, and then in the morning you'll be distant and cold, and you'll say that you're going to call me, and you never will, and I'll go back to work, and I'll be happy for the first hour, and then for the rest of the day I'll be absolutely miserable. And he says, that's not true. None of that's true. He says, it wasn't my intention to come up. And, he says, I'm in love with you. And she says, what do you mean? He says, this is not the first time I've seen you. I know, he tells her about that he knows her routine, and that, she always goes out at exactly the same time, and that she always picks up a romantic novel at, from the bookstore, and that she, goes to the same diner, and, when her train comes in, and he says, I've been observing you, I love you. And I would never do any of those things. I'll call you back, and I will be there in the morning. I won't be cold or distant. You don't have to worry about any of those things with me, because I love you. And, all I wanted was like a goodnight kiss. And she says, really? He says, yeah. And so she gives him the goodnight kiss. And then something unusual happens, and this is where the relevance of the allegory of the Fisher King comes back in. He's thinking about how happy he is with her, and then he starts seeing the Red Knight again. And he starts seeing what happened to his wife in the bar, his wife being shot by this character, Melnick. And he starts to see it in detail, and he starts screaming. The Red Knight is chasing him back to that area under the Brooklyn Bridge with those two same punks who tried to set Jack on fire earlier, and said, we're sick of seeing you homeless people down here in our neighborhood. One of them stabs him with a switchblade. One of them starts kicking him and beating him up. And you don't see really the aftermath until a bit later. Meanwhile, things are starting to go well for Jack again. His agent has called him and said he can get a new radio show, and he does, and things start going well. And again, it looks like he's going to get some sort of a cable deal, and he has temporarily broken up with Mercedes Ruehl. He told her he needs some time, he needs some space. She doesn't really understand that, and because again, she treats him really well. He's starting to act like an asshole again, basically, becoming very self-involved, and he doesn't care about anybody. When he's going to the meeting with his agent, played by Hyde Pierce, Gloria is outside the building, is being arrested by the police for some reason, and he says, Jack, this guy knows me, Jack, it's me, help, you got to help me, and he doesn't, he pretends that he doesn't know him, and they go inside the building, and they meet with, it's actually John Delancey, who plays the pitchman for this TV series that they want to do, and he says it's going to be about homeless people, but they want to make it fun. They want to make a fun show about homeless people and show that there are these homeless people who enjoy being homeless, and they don't like the responsibility, they don't mind the responsibility, and they're going to call it home free. And he just gets this disgusted look on his face and storms out of the building and goes back down and tries to find Gloria, but of course she's gone. She's been arrested, and so he just says "fuck," and then he's in his room, and he's talking about things, how well things are going for him, and he's gone back to see Mercedes Ruehl for some reason. And she's really pissed off at him, and because he's been being a jerk, and he's telling her about how well things are going. She says, "Well, maybe we can move in together. Maybe we could, get a place in Brooklyn Heights, and maybe even a house." And that's when he starts saying he thinks he needs a break. And then she kind of storms out on him. He gets a phone call. He says, "Yes." He says, "What? My wallet? What do you mean?" He goes to a hospital, and he sees that Perry, with Mercedes Ruehl, goes with him, and that he's been horribly beat up. He's in this basically complete body cast. The doctor tells him there are two problems. It's he'll recover from the injuries, and his arm's broken. It's in a cast, and his face is all slashed up, and but he's gone through a very severe traumatic shock. He's relived some sort of a very traumatic event, and he says, it's about what happened to his wife, and he may come out of it today, he may come out of it tomorrow, he may never come out of it. It may be years before he comes out of it. And so he's just he's numb. He doesn't see them, he doesn't hear them, and Mercedes Ruehl kind of walks out on him. He's trying to go, Anne, come back, and and now he's regretting that he's been such a jerk, but it's kind of too late, for the moment anyway. And so he's trying to figure out what to do to get Perry healed, and he comes back a few months later after his career has been going well, and he's getting money again, and he's dressing well, and he's back on the radio. He's got a show, and he comes back and brings him. He had this little kid in the first few scenes thought he was a bum again because his coat was ripped, and says, "Here, Mr. Bum," and he gives him this Pinocchio doll. When he was going to commit suicide, he had that Pinocchio doll strapped to his foot, and then he later on gives it to Robin Williams. Well, I don't know why, but he took it back at some point. He comes back to the hospital, and now Robin Williams is healed, physically, but he's still in this traumatic shock. This is basically a coma. He doesn't speak, he doesn't talk to anybody. He just lies on the bed in his pajamas, and he starts talking about, I'm not responsible for you, and you can't make me do this thing. Hey, he's going on and on about how he doesn't want to do this, and he doesn't feel guilty. He doesn't feel responsible for him. He's being really very a jerk, and he says, why don't you say something? He's like yelling at him basically. He said, "Fine, okay, I'll do it, but I want you to understand, I'm not doing it because I feel guilty or that I owe you anything. I'm just doing it because I want to do it for you, okay?" And he goes and he actually breaks into using grappling hooks and medieval kind of devices that Perry had in his boiler room to break into this sort of castle-like apartment of this billionaire. And he gets up onto the first floor, and he sees, interestingly, there's a stained glass window that has a depiction of the Red Knight, and he starts hearing horse hooves. Like, oh my God, now it's happening to me, you know. And then he breaks into, Langdon Carmichael's building, and it's very difficult. He has to scale a wall, and he climbs over, and he has to climb down a staircase. He sees an image of Edwin Malick with the shotgun shooting him, and of course he realizes that it's fake, it didn't happen. But then he goes down into the library, and he gets this cup, and he sees that Carmichael is passed out and evidently drunk, and he looks and sees that he's taken some pills, and he's like, oh no, what do I do now? He picks up the cup, and the cup says something like, to Langdon Carmichael, for your generous efforts and donations to the 1932 Christmas pageant. It's just a trophy. It's not the Holy Grail. It's just a trophy that he was given for helping out in helping fund a Christmas pageant. But he takes it anyway, and he realizes that to get out of the apartment without going through all this rigmarole of having to climb down the roof and everything, he's going to have to go out the front door, and the front door is guarded by a laser beam. And if he breaks the laser beam, it's going to set off an alarm. But he goes ahead and does it, and he goes out, and you hear the alarm go off, and he runs down the street. And then you start hearing police cars. And he goes back to the hospital and gives Perry the Holy Grail, as it were. He says, here, I got you your cup. Now you're going to wake up. He's exhausted, and he goes to sleep, in the chair next to Perry. And slowly you see Perry's fingers start to move on the base of the goblet, and eventually he wakes up, and he says, hey Jack, you got it, that's great. And Jack is just like, ugh, he's completely out of it. The next day you see Lydia comes into the hospital, and she's walking down the row of beds where Perry's bed was, and sees that he's not there. The Pinocchio doll is there, but he's not in his bed. And he's gotten up, and he's always trying to get people to sing the song How About You, which was written by Ralph Freed and composed by Barton Lane, and most famously sung by Frank Sinatra. But he's always singing this, and he's always trying to... He did the scene earlier where he was doing something called cloud bursting, where he goes into Central Park, takes all his clothes off, lights on his back, and looks at the clouds. He's saying, come on, Jack, you got to do this. Are you crazy? This is New York City. You can't get naked in New York City. And he says, oh, come on, you're being too stuck up. And so while he's doing that, he's singing that song, How About You? And he's got the whole hospital, all the patients, gathered together, and they're saying, how about you, when Lydia comes in. And then, he says, oh, hi, Lydia, how are you? And she says, are you okay? He says, are you my girl? She says, yes, I am. And so things end well on that note. And then the final scene you see is that both Jack and Perry are lying naked on their backs in Central Park looking up at the clouds, and he says, they moved. Did I do that? He said, Perry says, don't be silly, it's the wind. And then, you hear the song Howell. He says, good night, Manhattan. He said, say good night, Jack. He says, good night, Jack. Like Jack Fetty. The skyline bursts with fireworks that spell out the end. I think it's a really good movie. The thing I said that Gilliam pulled a trick, and if you're looking for it, you'll find out that, again, he made you think that the Fisher King was a reference to Perry. It's not. It's not Perry who's the Fisher King. It's Jack. Jack is the one who needs to be healed from his wound. The wound is his guilt from what happened to Perry's wife and the other people in the bar because he egged on this crazy radio listener. And he's the one who's healed by the Grail. He could only be healed by going to retrieve the Grail and bring it to Perry. Yes, Perry is healed too, but he wasn't the Fisher King. As far as the allegory goes, Jack was. That's what I think that the trick was. again, it's not a perfect movie. It's not a terrific. It's not as good as, say, Brazil, or even things like Time Bandits or The Zero Theorem, or certainly not as good as 12 Monkeys. But it's still a very good Terry Gilliam film, and I do highly recommend it.